It's the same type of thing when they say like, oh, with the trans stuff, right? They'll be like, oh, I don't care what adults do, but leave the kids out of it. It doesn't matter. The left is very happy to make it so that you can't trans kids, so long as in the Civil Rights Act, gender identity expression is encoded, right? Because it just means that, all right, well, they just have to wait until they're 18 to be a protected class or whatever the fuck the case may be, right? But what ends up happening is, because you're getting rid of the most egregious part, you're actually making it more palatable. You're making it harder to oppose because you're actually strengthening it by making taking away the most odious, offensive aspects of it. Where it's like, no, the whole thing is rotten. Just because you cut out the most rotten part doesn't mean that it's now edible, you know? But they'll shove it down your fucking throat.
Of course. So the one other thing that on the backlash that you talked about that like lit a light up, and I don't know why it never clicked for me, but when you were talking about kind of like sexual and gender identity, how it's protected under the Civil Rights Act, and like I should definitely be more well informed about like all the ins and outs of this, but though when you were talking about how like sexual identity is protected by law and you don't want that to be for you, and that really clicked for me. It's like, holy crap, we're talking about something so arbitrary, and I don't want to say it's undefinable, but like, how do you know somebody is gay? Like in California and New York, right? To throw a bone to more even normie cons, if you misgender somebody, you could be fined. Like if you're a tenant or if you're a landlord and you misgender somebody, you could be fined in the state of California or New York. That's strictly on someone's arbitrary decision of what their identity is at that moment. How do you know that? And then, like, this is such a ridiculous thing. Like, we shouldn't have any special protections for anybody under any laws because you have constitutional protections as an individual that lives in the United States as a citizen of this country. If you are a foreigner, then okay, we don't extend those protections to you because you're not a citizen of this country. But under the Civil Rights Act, you, Basil, and not that you necessarily do this,
I'm legally privileged over you.
Exactly, right. I'm a white, straight guy. I'm not a Christian, but I am, I'm a straight white guy who's married to a woman, right? Mm-hmm. Our daughter is going to be here in, about a month and a half.
Oh, mazel tov.
Thank you. Yes. My wife and my daughter will have additional protections that I don't have because they're women, right? So, right, when you look at this through like the Marxist lens, then, okay, well, they're women, so they're already defended under one aspect of the civil rights law. You, Basil, you're defended on another right, and then so on.
Brown
and so
and gay.
forth.
I love, yeah. No, I mean, so, okay. So I actually take the Ann Coulter. So let's just say I really try to focus on things that are in political contention, right?
Sure.
What's actually up for debate right now, right? So when people say, "Oh, Basil, you bang on a lot about the fucking trannies, but here you are, a faggot, saying so," I'm like, totally true. However, the gay question has already been is not in political contention, right? Yeah. At this moment, at the state level, even at the federal level, the Equality Act is not passed. The expansion of the Civil Rights Act is on the basis of gender identity expression. 10 to 15 years ago, yes, the gay question was the bleeding edge of it, right? And I would have been here saying, no, sexual identities aren't real. But at that time, what they did was, I'm sure you remember, like, back in the day on fucking, like, Sally Jesse Raphael or Oprah or Geraldo, it was all about the gay gene, right? We were talking about Ellen coming out and fucking Matthew Shepard and all this shit. Matthew Shepard was gay Floyd, right? Gay George Floyd. It was like that kind of fake narrative to push forward the expansion of the Civil Rights Act. So at that time, right, they kept everyone on a hamster wheel talking about, oh, are you born this way? The gay gene, blah, 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 blah. Meanwhile, the political apparatchiks are working overtime behind the scenes to get sexual orientation codified in the law, right? And then the second it was, no one gives a fuck about talking about a gay gene anymore. No one fucking cares about that shit. Now what we're talking about is, oh, brain scans and, oh, bathrooms and sports. All that shit is downstream of whether does a person have a gender identity and should it be recognized in law? The answer to both of those questions is obviously no, right? But it goes back to your whole, like, the difference between, when I use the trademark symbol a lot, right? Online. I use the TM. And I use that for black TM, woman TM, gay TM, trans TM. And what I mean by that is to say, I'm not talking about people with African ancestry. I'm not talking about females. I'm not talking about guys who fuck guys, and I'm not talking about cross-dressers. I'm talking about the people who fall under those categories, who then take the extra step of adopting for themselves a political identity that is protected under the Civil Rights Act. So now why I brought that up was to say, I like to focus on what's in contention, and repealing the Civil Rights Act. Of course, yes, let's repeal the fucking Civil Rights Act. But no one's really talking about it in terms of like a cognizable political coalition that's saying, as a plank, we're doing this, right? So I take the Ann Coulter position on the Civil Rights Act. I say when the Civil Rights Act was passed, right, whether you agree with it or not, it was meant to address the legacy of slavery for foundational Black Americans, right? Whether that's still relevant today is an open question, blah, 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 blah. But that's what it was meant for. However, since its passing, it's been expanded over and over and over again. So you had that fucking that fucking goblin, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, in the 60s and 70s, expand it from just, it went from foundational Black Americans to all racial minorities, then to create a protected class for women, and then to create a protected class for sexual orientations, then to create a protected class for trannies or whatever. And for each of these instances, what's happening is you're creating a client class, right? That is able to, among the pool of females, a client class who are going to adopt for themselves that political identity of woman, who are then able to take advantage of those legal privileges, right? And act as foot soldiers to defend it, right? So they're going to be like, you can't be sexist in the workplace. You can't discriminate based on sex. And by doing so, create further censorship, because now HR departments, you can't have sexual harassment in the workplace. You can't discriminate against women. You can't goodbye free association, right? And further and further with the gays and whatever, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so when it comes to like what you talked about, where it's like this kind of who's to say, who's to know. I've been celibate for 3 years, right? As a religious, because I'm Muslim, I'm not a good Muslim, but I choose to because, I sin enough, right? I'm not trying to rack them up. So, who's to say my subjective same attractions that defines who I am? This is lived bullshit. Any Orthodox Christian, any Orthodox Jew, any Muslim knows exactly what I'm talking about. You hate the sin, but you love the sinner, right? You don't adopt for yourself the identity of your sin, right? You don't say, oh, because I committed sodomy once or twice in my life, I am now this different type of person. I'm a gay man, right? But if the Civil Rights Act is such that by me saying I am a gay man, I become legally privileged over you, well, now I have an incentive to do so, right? And in this exact same way, it's like cross-dressers have always existed. Effeminate men have always existed, right? Masculine women have always existed. But what's happening now is that mentally ill perverts, cross-dressing freaks, and whatever are being collapsed into one category that we call trans TM, because it's about expanding the Civil Rights Act to include that patronage class. And thank you for calling me base. I appreciate it.
For the listeners, Nate Shumway said this Basil guy is pretty base. Yes, he is. And this is
my cousin, that guy.